I didn't make a scene. I didn't raise my voice. I just stood in the parking lot of the building I'd spent 31 years building from nothing, and I read the text message from my son a second time to make sure I understood it correctly. Dad, we've restructured the board. Your access card has been deactivated. Legal will be in touch about your retirement package. Don't come to the anniversary gala tonight. That was it. No call, no meeting, not even a period at the end of that last sentence. I put my phone in my pocket. I looked up at the name on the building, Hargrove Industrial Fabrication, and I thought about the winter morning in 1993 when I poured the concrete foundation for this place myself. Because I couldn't afford to hire a crew, I thought about my wife, Loretta, bringing me coffee in a thermos and sitting on an overturned bucket beside me while I worked, telling me she believed in me when I wasn't sure I believed in myself. She passed 4 years ago. Pancreatic cancer. 11 weeks from diagnosis to the end. I thought about all of that, and then I walked back to my truck, drove to the diner on Route 9 where I'd eaten breakfast every Saturday for 15 years, ordered black coffee and eggs over easy, and I started making phone calls. My name is Richard Hargrove. I'm 67 years old. I built a precision metal fabrication company that now employs over 200 people and supplies components to aerospace contractors across the Southeast. I raised one son. I gave him everything, and I want to tell you what happened when he decided that everything wasn't enough, that he wanted me gone too. Donovan was always the sharp one. That was what his teacher said, what the coaches said, what everyone said. Sharp, quick, decisive. I took a lot of pride in that when he was young. I thought those were my qualities showing up in him, the things I'd passed down. I wanted to believe that. He came into the business at 26, right after his MBA from Georgia Tech. I gave him a real position, VP of Operations, not a ceremonial title, not something to put on a business card while he learned to golf. He earned his place. I made sure of that. The first 2 years, I rode him hard, made him understand every part of the supply chain, every vendor relationship, every safety protocol. He complained about it exactly once, and I told him that if he wanted to put his name on a building, he had to know what was inside it. By 30, he was running day-to-day operations better than I had at 40. I told him that. I told him I was proud of him. I started reducing my own hours, coming in 3 days a week instead of 5, stepping back from client meetings, letting him take the calls that used to come to me. It felt right. It felt like what you do when you've done the work. He got married 6 years ago. Her name is Tiffany. I tried. I genuinely tried. She was pleasant enough at dinners, asked the right questions, remembered things I told her, but there was something transactional about her attention that I couldn't shake. Loretta would have seen it immediately. Loretta had a way of looking at a person and knowing whether they were present with you or just adjacent to you. Tiffany's brother, Wade, started coming around the business about 2 years into the marriage. A financial consultant, Donovan told me. Just doing some informal analysis, nothing formal. I said I'd like to meet with him officially, review whatever he was looking at. Donovan told me there was nothing to review yet, that it was preliminary, that I was making something out of nothing. I let it go. That was my first mistake. The second mistake was signing the succession agreement 18 months ago. I want to be clear about what I thought I was signing. My attorney, a man I'd used for 20 years, a man I trusted, presented it to me as an estate planning document. Gradual transfer of operational control to Donovan over a 5-year period, with a board-supervised review at each stage. I was to retain 41% ownership and a permanent seat on the board. Non-negotiable clauses, my attorney said. Standard language. I signed it on a Tuesday afternoon in October. My attorney and Donovan were both in the room. I remember Donovan shaking my hand afterward and saying, "This is the right move, Dad. You've earned the rest." 3 weeks later, my attorney retired abruptly, moved to Scottsdale. I sent him a card and didn't think twice about it. The first sign that something was wrong came 8 months after I signed. I tried to access the quarterly financials through the company portal, something I'd done every quarter for 30 years, and my credentials no longer worked. I called the IT department. They told me my access level had been downgraded per a memo from the executive office. I asked to see the memo. They said they'd have to get approval to send it to me. I called Donovan. He said there had been a security restructuring, that the new protocols limited document access to active executives, that he'd get me a printed copy of anything I needed. Just let him know what specifically I wanted to see. I said I wanted to see everything. He said that wasn't really how it worked anymore. I hired a new attorney, a woman named Patricia Cho, and I want to say that clearly because she is the reason I'm still standing. She had been a corporate litigation specialist for 22 years. A friend of mine who ran a manufacturing outfit in Charlotte had used her in a dispute with a supplier and told me she was the sharpest person he'd ever sat across from in a conference room. I told Patricia everything: the succession agreement, my former attorney's retirement, the access downgrade, the brother-in-law's presence in the business. I watched her take notes in a small yellow legal pad without saying much, and when I finished, she looked up at me and said, "How much do you trust your original attorney?" I said I had trusted him completely. She said, "That's what I was afraid of." It took Patricia and an independent forensic accountant 6 weeks to reconstruct what had happened. I'm going to tell you what they found, and I want you to understand that I'm not telling you this to shock you. I'm telling you because I think you deserve to know what greed looks like when it's wearing the face of someone you love. The succession agreement I signed was not the document my attorney had described to me. Somewhere between the draft I reviewed and the version I signed, 3 clauses had been altered. The 5-year graduated transfer had been reduced to 18 months. My board seat was contingent on a continued advisory role, which could be terminated by a majority board vote, and my 41% ownership stake had been structured as a class of non-voting shares that could be diluted through a new stock issuance requiring only a 2/3 board approval. The board at the time I signed was 5 people, including me. In the 14 months since the signing, Donovan had replaced 2 board members with people I didn't know. Both were associates of Wade's. The 3 of them now constituted a majority. Wade had not been doing informal financial analysis. He had been restructuring the company's accounts payable relationships, inserting a consulting LLC he controlled as a pass-through intermediary for 3 of our largest vendor contracts. Over 18 months, approximately $2.3 million had been redirected through that LLC, technically legal, structured to look like standard consulting fees. Practically, it was siphoning. My former attorney had accepted a lump sum payment, wired to an account his wife held. 11 days after I signed the succession agreement, I sat in Patricia's office while she walked me through the documentation, and I felt something I hadn't felt since the day Loretta died. Not anger. Not yet. Something quieter. A kind of settling, like the air pressure changing before a storm. I had given my son everything: the company, the title, the trust, and he had spent the better part of 2 years dismantling all of it, piece by piece, with the patience and the precision that I had taught him. I asked Patricia what we could do. She smiled for the first time since I'd met her. "Quite a lot," she said. "But we have to be careful about timing. The 40th anniversary gala was Donovan's idea. I want you to remember that. He planned it. He sent the invitations. He booked the ballroom at the Marriott Grand in downtown Savannah, the same hotel where Loretta and I had celebrated our 20th wedding anniversary, which was either a coincidence or something I didn't want to think too hard about. 240 guests: clients, vendors, city officials, employees, community partners. The mayor was supposed to attend. A local news crew had confirmed coverage. Donovan invited me. That's the part that still gets me when I sit with it. He sent me a formal invitation, heavy cream cardstock with embossed lettering, addressed to Richard Hargrove, founder. He knew what Patricia had found. He knew I had a new attorney, and he still sent the invitation because he had already moved the chess pieces into position, because by the night of the gala, the stock dilution would have been completed through an emergency board resolution voted on that afternoon, and I would walk into that room as a man with a ceremonial title and no meaningful stake in anything. He planned to announce the dilution at the gala, in front of everyone, a fait accompli dressed up as a corporate milestone. What he didn't know was what I had done with the 6 weeks between receiving that invitation and the night of the event. Patricia and I had filed for an emergency injunction in Chatham County Superior Court, based on the forensic accountant's findings and documentary evidence of the altered succession agreement, including a version recovered from my former attorney's hard drive, which his paralegal had quietly provided to us after learning why I was asking. The injunction, if granted, would freeze all share issuances and board actions related to ownership restructuring, pending a full hearing. We filed on a Monday. The hearing was set for the following Friday, the day after the gala. I also contacted the FBI's Financial Crimes Unit. The $2.3 million in diverted vendor payments through Wade's LLC, combined with the evidence of my attorney's bribe retirement, gave them what they needed to open a preliminary investigation. They asked me to delay any confrontation and allow them to develop the case. I agreed to that. Mostly. I called Donovan 2 days before the gala and told him I would be attending. He paused for a long time and then said, "Of course, Dad. We'd love to have you there. I want to tell you about that evening because I want you to understand it correctly. I didn't go to the gala to make a scene. I didn't go to confront my son in front of 200 people or to humiliate him or to deliver some dramatic speech from the podium. I went because I had earned the right to be in that room, and because I had spent 40 years building a reputation in that city, and because I was not going to disappear quietly into a retirement I had not chosen. I wore the charcoal suit I wore to Loretta's funeral. I don't know exactly why, it just seemed right. Donovan saw me come in, and the expression on his face lasted only half a second, just long enough for me to see it. Something between surprise and recalculation. He crossed the room and shook my hand and said I looked great, said he was glad I came, said he wanted to introduce me to some people later. All of it smooth practiced, the voice he uses with clients. I said, "Of course, enjoy your evening." I spent the first hour talking to people I had known for decades, the plan manager who had been with the company 28 years, the woman who ran our quality assurance program and had turned down 3 offers from competitors because she said she liked working for people who kept their word, the city councilman who had helped us navigate a zoning dispute back in 2004 and asked me every time he saw me how the business was going. I told all of them the truth. I said things were complicated right now, that there was some legal work underway, that I'd explain more once the dust settled. None of them pressed me. They had known me long enough to understand that I don't say things I don't mean. At 9:15, Donovan took the podium. He talked about the company's history. He talked about growth and innovation and looking ahead. He talked about the next generation of leadership. He was good at it. I'll give him that. He had my timing, my instinct for when to pause and let a room sit with something. At one point, he talked about what I had built and he said, "My father gave everything to this company." And I watched people in the audience nod and look over at me. And I thought about what that sentence meant and what he intended it to mean, and whether he understood that those were 2 completely different things. He was about to announce the share restructuring. I could see it in the way he shifted his notes when his phone buzzed on the podium. He glanced at it. Something changed in his face. He picked up the phone, read something, set it back down. He wrapped up the speech quickly, thanked everyone for coming, raised the glass, stepped down. What he had read was a text from his attorney. The injunction had been granted. Patricia had reached a judge on an emergency basis that evening, citing irreparable harm. All share issuances were frozen effective immediately pending the Friday hearing. I won't pretend the next 3 months were easy. The hearing produced an independent audit, which confirmed everything Patricia's forensic accountant had found and added to it. Wade's LLC had been used to funnel payments not just from vendor contracts, but from a line of credit taken out against company equipment. Equipment that I still owned outright under the original Articles of Incorporation. A detail Wade had apparently not discovered in his research. That gave Patricia a breach of fiduciary duty claim that she said was about as clean as anything she'd seen in 22 years. The FBI investigation moved faster than I expected. Wade was indicted on 6 counts of wire fraud and 1 count of conspiracy, 11 weeks after the gala. His attorney tried to negotiate a plea that would have required him to testify against Donovan. The conversation I'm told happened in that negotiation is one I wasn't present for, but Patricia told me afterward that Wade didn't hesitate for very long. My former attorney agreed to return the bribery payment in full in exchange for the civil suit being dropped. He lost his law license. He is living in Scottsdale. Donovan's situation was the most complicated, legally and otherwise. He was named in the civil action, and there was a period of approximately 6 weeks where the federal investigation was actively evaluating whether to include him in the criminal charges. Patricia told me that decision was mine to influence, in terms of whether I wanted to push for full criminal prosecution or settle for the civil remedies. I thought about it for a long time. I thought about the boy who used to fall asleep in the cab of my truck on job sites when he was 6 years old. I thought about him at Loretta's funeral, standing straight beside me, not crying until the very end, when he finally put his arm around my shoulder, and I felt how much he was shaking. I thought about all of that. And then I thought about what he had done, deliberately, over the course of 2 years with patience and calculation. I thought about what he had planned to do to me in that ballroom. I told Patricia to let the federal investigation proceed without interference from me. Donovan was ultimately not charged criminally. The evidence of his direct knowledge of the criminal conduct was circumstantial, and the U.S. Attorney's Office declined to prosecute. But the civil judgment was substantial. He was removed from the board. His shares were restructured back to reflect the original agreement terms. He was ordered to repay $1.1 million in improperly diverted compensation over the 18-month period, and he is barred from any executive role in the company for 7 years under the consent decree. Tiffany filed for divorce 4 months after the gala. I don't know whether that reflects poorly on her or well on her, honestly. I've stopped trying to figure it out. My access card works again. I park in the same spot I've parked in for 31 years. The one closest to the side door, because that's where I always came in at 5 in the morning before anyone else arrived. The name on the building still says Hargrove Industrial Fabrication. And some mornings, when the light hits it at the right angle, the letters look exactly the way they looked in my head 30 years ago, when all of this was just a piece of land and a concrete foundation and a thermos of coffee and a woman who believed in me. I brought then a new COO, someone I found through an industry contact, a woman who had run operations for a mid-size aerospace supplier in Huntsville for 12 years. She is precise, principled, and she has no patience for shortcuts. She reminds me of myself, which is either a good sign or a warning, depending on the day. I'm in the office 2 days a week now. I eat lunch at the plant sometimes, at the long tables in the break room, the same way I did when there were only 18 employees, and everyone knew everyone. People don't always know what to say to me about everything that happened, and I don't ask them to say anything. We talk about work, about weekend plans, about the college football rankings. It's enough. There are days when I think about calling Donovan, not to say anything in particular, just to hear his voice and know that he's all right, the way you want to know a person you love is all right, even after they've shown you what they're capable of. I haven't made the call. I don't know if I will. What I know is this: I built something real. I built it with my hands and my time and a great deal of help from a woman who deserved better than 11 weeks. I am not going to pretend that what happened didn't break something. It did, and some things don't fully mend, and I've made a kind of peace with that. But I am still here. The building is still standing, and the name on it belongs to me. I've been thinking about the morning I stood in that parking lot and read Donovan's text for the second time. Not because I'm still angry, I've moved past most of that, but because I keep coming back to the question of how it got there. Our son who fell asleep in my truck on job sites, who stood beside me at his mother's grave shaking like he was 12 years old again, ended up sending that message like I was a vendor he was terminating. I don't think greed arrived in him overnight. That's the part people don't want to sit with. It builds slowly, the way rust builds on good steel. You don't notice it until the structure is already compromised. Every shortcut he allowed himself, every time he told himself that what he was doing was just business, just strategy, just what smart people do. Each one of those was a small decision about who he was going to be. By the time Wade started running money through that LLC, Donovan had already made 100 smaller choices that made that one possible. That's how it works. Not a single dramatic turn, but a long, quiet drift away from the person you were raised to be. What saved me wasn't luck. I want to be clear about that. It was the habit, built over 40 years, of keeping my own records, of reading what I signed, of knowing my own company down to the bolt torque specifications on the fabrication floor. Donovan counted on me being tired. He counted on me wanting to step back and trust the people I loved, and I had for a while. But the foundation was still there. The discipline I built before he was born, and when I needed it, it held. Patricia told me once that most of her clients in situations like mine wait too long because they can't believe it's really happening. I understood that completely. There is a specific grief in discovering that someone you made, someone you fed and taught and stayed up worrying about, looked at what you built and decided the fastest way to have it was to take it from you. That grief is real, and I'm not going to tell you it goes away entirely. But grief and action are not mutually exclusive. You can feel the weight of something and still move. The three things that got me through this, I wouldn't have called them virtues at the time, but that's what they were knowing right from wrong and holding to it when it was costly, thinking clearly when everything in me wanted to react instead of plan, and simply refusing to quit when quitting would have been so much easier. Not because I'm exceptional, because those are things you practice, the same way you practice anything, until they're there when you need them. The name on the building still says Hargrove. I park in the same spot I always did. Some mornings, the light hits that sign at just the right angle, and I think about Loretta on that overturned bucket with her thermos, and I think about how she would look at all of this and what she would say. I think she would say I already know.